We welcome our viewers for this episode of VitaDonum, Life is Gift, our series of programs on EWTN Low Countries dealing with everything that's about life, about death, about the origin of life, the final destination of life. And I would like to Georges Buscemi, if the pronunciation is
Yes.
well. You seem to be very near, but in fact you're in Quebec, aren't you?
Yes,
Canada?
we're in Montreal right now.
Could you please introduce yourself?
So my name is Georges Buscemi. I am president of Campagne Quebec V, which is a pro-life, pro-family organization based in Montreal, Canada, in the province of Quebec. I have been president for the last 12 years, going on 13 years. Before that, I was a student at McGill University studying religious studies. And so what we do here is we fight the culture of death on many fronts, from abortion to euthanasia. And then on the family side, we defend the natural family. And we also defend, I would say, the place of Christianity in the public space. That which enables societies to grow is to have a Christian culture. So that's what we do here. We participate alongside other pro-life groups across the world and in Canada, doing various events such as the March for Life, an annual event in Ottawa. We do 40 Days for Life prayer campaigns, which you may have heard of and which have spread up throughout the world. So I began my time at Campagne Quebec V organizing the 40 Days for Life in Montreal. And we do similar events. Recently there was an event, a prayer rosary for the end of the COVID situation that was had spread throughout Austria and throughout France. And we also have 65 locations in Quebec and 65 other locations outside of Quebec in Canada. So we did that as well. So anything that would promote Christian culture, that would promote family and life, that's what we do at Campagne Quebec V.
So I wouldn't know where to start, because that means you're dealing with many aspects. In general, for this kind of work, how is the climate at the moment in Canada? Because sometimes we get news that is hard to believe about obligations to avoid any language dealing with male, female, or the way nature has made us.
Yes.
Is it still possible? Can you still act and speak up freely in Canada?
Well, you asked about the weather. Well, right now it's winter and it's very cold still in Canada. And indeed, it is also cold in a spiritual sense as well. So I would say that yes, in Canada there is still a nominal freedom of expression. People can speak about God's intention for man and woman, the family. People can publish on these subjects. It's a different question whether these same people can then hold a decent job or have a job with the public service, or be a teacher or a professor, or anything of social consideration, anything that's considered prestigious or interesting. It's not so clear whether a person who has traditional Catholic views would be accepted in the higher elements of society. So if one is ready to remain humble and in a simple existence and maybe a blue-collar job, or if they're lucky enough, such as I, who was found like perhaps the single freest job in Quebec where I could speak about these things because I am paid to speak about these things. But if one is not in a situation such as I, then people living in Canada and in Quebec in particular have to be willing to sacrifice a lot of prestige for the truth. They'll have to work very simple jobs, very humble jobs, or else otherwise they'll have to shut up about all these things. Seriously, it's not time anymore to speak about marriage, to speak about the vocation of man and woman, and especially not about abortion or euthanasia or any other gay marriage or any other of these topics.
When you say you have to accept having a rather humble position in society, are there actually many people having humble positions in society or accepting to live like that, who do commit themselves to the fight for life?
Well, we see them.
Is it a big movement in?
We see them working with us in our pro-life movement. So when we see people coming to our vigils to pray for an end to abortion, I've done abortion vigils myself in front of abortion centers. And who comes to these vigils? Are they the lawyers, the doctors, the politicians? Are they people who work for the government in high-paid jobs? No, the people that come to us are mailmen, retired people, perhaps some students, and the like. And so we see that I used to think in our organization that our organization may be on the way out because we had mostly old people supporting us. But we've learned lately that oftentimes for our tough, sensitive topics, retired people are the ones that tend to want to support because they have less to lose from their support of our organization. They have less to lose from being associated with us. Those with families, those with jobs, they may support financially, but they cannot be publicly seen as supporting us lest they lose their jobs in their different fields, whether they're teachers or doctors or other types of that nature. If they are seen too much to be working with the pro-life or pro-family movement, they will lose their job or their career will come to a stop. There's an example. A few politicians were discovered having given $700, so pennies, not much money, but they were seen having given a few dollars to pregnancy counseling centers in Quebec that were pro-life, that were recognized as not recommending abortion. These politicians had done so without really knowing that these centers were pro-life. But once it was discovered that they were, they had to go through a series of political ablutions, a kind of a ritual of purification in front of all. They had to disown the groups. They had to promise to do a better job of screening their donations to community organizations. And they had to, of course, reaffirm the right of a woman to kill her unborn child under any condition, to maintain their position in Parliament, in the National Assembly of Quebec. So it goes to show that the moment somebody publicly embraces our positions in Quebec at the moment, their popular or public prestige is close to being fatally wounded. And so the people that tend to gravitate to us and openly cooperate with us are retired people or people with otherwise nothing to lose because they have a very humble job already.
It sounds very much Scandinavian to the extreme,
Yes.
And then so different from the United States.
Oh.
How come? How do we explain this immense cultural difference between the United States of America and Canada, which often seen from Europe is like almost one of the states, because it's
Right.
It's bordering. How do you explain it?
Okay, well, there's a difference then for people who don't know Canada very well. There are two distinct societies, I would say, in the founding of Canada. There's the English portion of Canada, and there's the French portion of Canada. I'm right now in the French portion. It's the province of Quebec, and there are other little pockets of French Canadians outside of Quebec. New Brunswick are the Acadians, and there are Franco-Manitobans and others, but I would say the 80% and more of the Francophone population of Canada resides in Quebec. So Quebec was founded first and in the 17th century, and so and even earlier actually. So, and it was a Catholic state. And it was a very model of a Catholic society. It was, I would say, sacral, as some would call it, meaning that the centrality of religion was very much a thing. And the bishops held much power in education and healthcare. And this lasted until, I would say, the 1960s. So with the 1960s came about what is called the Quiet Revolution in Quebec. And all at once, virtually, in the space, let's say, of 2 to 5 years, Quebec went from a Catholic society to, I would say, a neo-Marxist or very liberal society, under the pretext of needing to catch up with the times economically and socially, that the province was deemed backward, was deemed behind the times and so forth, and so had to catch up. And at that point, the bishops, in the wake of the Second Vatican Council and with the promulgation of Dignitatis Humanae, it was thought that it was best to concede these liberties to the laity, who quickly made quick work of the Catholic education system and turned it into a kind of neo-socialist educational system. So before, there were these Catholic schools called collèges classiques, which were Jesuit run for the most part, and which trained the elite of Quebec society, lawyers and so on, in a classical Catholic sense. So Greek, Latin, the liberal arts. And these colleges were all closed and replaced with American type high schools in big bunker style concrete structures. And all the kids were bused to these new locations. And so very quickly a transition occurred at the level of education. And at the same time, all the religious, Catholic religious who worked at the Catholic schools defrocked en masse to become workers in these new and emancipated and socialist liberation theology type institutions. And the same occurred with healthcare, where the health system was secularized and abortion was legalized in Canada in 1969. And then Quebec had its own abortion clinics by the late 70s. And since then, Quebec has gone, therefore, from a Catholic society to a kind of Scandinavian-style socialist society, which would be left of any American state. As for English Canada, what happened was that after the US Revolution and Declaration of Independence, all those Anglican loyalists went to Canada. And Canada itself was still a British colony. And so the Anglican kind of spirit was maintained in English Canada. And that elite has been in place and is still in place, I would say, in English Canada. And so we have a kind of a mitigated secularism with a constitutional monarchy, with the monarch still being supposedly a defender of the faith, of the Anglican faith. And so Canada on its English side, I would say is about 10, 15, or perhaps 20 years behind Quebec in terms of moral and spiritual decadence. But as a whole, I would say Canada is still on the left of even the most leftist state in the United States, with the exception of certain provinces, perhaps in the prairies, such as Saskatchewan and Alberta, who might be a little bit more to the right. They're like our Texas. Alberta and Saskatchewan are the equivalent of Texas for Canada. But I would say, in comparison to an American state, they would be maybe, I don't know, something like Massachusetts or Vermont or something like that. Not very, they would be very in favor, for the most part, of the Democratic candidates for whatever US election, for example.
The story you tell about your church is strangely familiar with the church history in Holland. And you talked about, you used the term modernism. I think it's increasingly difficult to define what it really is, because the results of it are so overwhelming and impressive. When you are in Canada now, is it possible to publicize pro-life issues, or are you being sort of censored by the press, by the media? Do you manage to get your message across to a certain public?
Yes, we do manage to get our message across. I can speak for Quebec and to a lesser extent English Canada, because I don't work day to day on the English Canada side, although I do get a lot of news from that side. But in Quebec, it's possible to advertise, to perhaps advertise, for example, your Facebook page on Facebook. There's some limitations. You have to check a box, for example, in Facebook saying that it's a social issue, and then your advertisement will go to less people than otherwise it would have had. There's also different, constraints with your Facebook account. I know that because that's the way we advertise. For Google, for example, we wanted to advertise our pregnancy care center, but finally we were banned from advertising with Google for life because they considered our advertisement medical, a type of medical malpractice, that we were preventing women from accessing medical services, i.e. abortion, through our ads, which funneled women to pregnancy care centers that did not counsel abortion. So by doing so, Google therefore said, you can no longer advertise on our network. Well, the Google network is the #1 by far internet advertiser. And so we've been cut off from about 80% of the advertising space online because of our pro-life views. There are bus ads, for example. If one tries to do an advertisement on a bus, it's a hit and miss proposition. It may be successful, it may not be successful. Sometimes, quite often actually, these ads are contested and taken down, and then a court case 2 years later may give one the victory of having of being able to put the ad back on, but that's only after 2 years of effort. We are currently in a court case right now against the provincial government, having put a bubble zone, what's called a bubble zone, a 50-meter zone around abortion centers, in which we are not allowed to express ourselves concerning abortion, and not allowed to counsel women to not kill their unborn child. And so we're trying to get that bubble zone eliminated. There's also a federal law that just got voted in. It's called C3. And this law has a penalty of up to 10 years for anyone through words, through video, or any other means engenders fear in someone and makes them not liable to go forth with their decision to undergo a medical treatment. So this was aimed on one part against people who questioned the vaccination for COVID, but on the other, it also aims people who counsel against abortion and who may use, for example, signs with aborted babies on them. So this type of, I would say, free speech, this type of speech which involves the use of aborted baby pictures, that now in Canada might be punishable by up to 10 years in prison, because they could argue that you're trying to scare people into not having an abortion. So yes, we can speak one-on-one, we can speak even in the context of events, but the wider society is difficult to tap into. And then there's the ultimate problem, I would say, is the mainstream media that are almost unanimously pro-abortion. And so if they are to invite you to speak in front of their audience, which is the audience that the people listen to, this is where the people are reached, they will do so only in view of sabotaging you and discrediting you in front of others. So whenever I've been invited to these different shows or panels, I've always been outnumbered 3 to 1, 4 to 1, so as to give the appearance to the viewer that my view is marginal and a minority view. So that discredits the point of view being discussed almost before the person has opened their mouth. Or else I've been invited and literally been attacked on the radio and discredited, and with an article written after the interview with a kind of a syllabus of my errors, and to have my picture beside the syllabus of all the heresies that I said, this interview I speak of was on conversion therapy, by the way, where I would say something like, it's the choice of a person if they want to, have attractions that are compatible with their sex. They should be allowed to have a therapy that enables them to do so. They would list all these propositions that I made during the show, and they have it in a newspaper article so that it'd be put on record with my face, so as to make me unhireable by any employer in the future if ever I were to try to get a job somewhere. So that's the hostility of the mainstream media, and it expresses itself in many ways, but not least of which is this kind of Inquisition style treatment.
Well, I wonder, we've had quite some news about this Turkish protest.
Yes.
In what way could you see that as a manifestation of unease, of the feeling that something is wrong, but people can't formulate it, they can't really point exactly at the causes? Isn't that just a sort of unrest? Because it seems to have a large support amongst the population. Isn't that a feeling of unrest, that something is growing, that something is very, very wrong in our society? I can see it in different ways in my own society. Is that, or is it wishful?
Yes, no, there definitely is. There definitely is in Canada what has been called a populist movement. It's the sentiment that the institutions that are supposed to take care of us, we can speak of the media, we could speak of government, we could speak of academia, we can even speak of the church to a certain extent. These institutions are not doing their job properly. They are not oriented to their goal. They seem to have been usurped by other interests. And so they are operating, they are funded but they're not doing the jobs that they're supposed to be doing, and the people whom they should be serving are unhappy about it. And they're seeing that they cannot speak to anyone because all the people that they try to speak to, whether it's the local government representative, whether it's the local church representative, the message doesn't get through. There's no more way to communicate and to affect change and to have our voices heard. And so this kind of magma boils and boils and boils, and once in a while it explodes because there's just no outlet for it. There's no way to express oneself other than social media and the various YouTube and so forth, which have been increasingly censored in the last years for that very reason. So I would say that yes, in Canada, the trucker movement was an explosion, I would say, a populist explosion stemming from the fact that there was a kind of an imposed COVID narrative and that the government was not responding to the reality of the various elements of that situation. And finally, the population took matters in its own hands. They literally, and then I speak again of the humble, the truck drivers, the relatively independent employees, took matters into their own hands. They drove their trucks and they went to Ottawa and they blockaded the nation's capital for as long as they could, until our Prime Minister took the means necessary to get them out of there with force. But otherwise, and they received upwards of $10 million US of funding, received from regular people who recognized in that movement, finally, something that corresponded to their aspirations, when no other political party seems to have done so, and no other institution seems to have done so. So I think that the populist movement, therefore, is something that will be seen again and again, because I do believe that in large part, and the last 2 years has been evidence of this, institutions have become redirected by interests other than what those institutions ought to be pursuing. And they've been co-opted. And they have to be purified. All the institutions in the West have to be purified and redirected to their original goals.
This therapy, or I don't know how you call it, for people with homosexual inclinations, could you explain it a little bit? Because, you know, what is the preposition? You know, I would say there are three approaches. One is, let's say, the traditional classic Catholic approach. That means, according to Catholic teaching, where you say it's a sin, not the inclination, but the act is a sin. Then there is maybe the psychiatric point of view, saying it's an illness. It's a disease, if you like, but a psychic one. And of course, there's a third way, which is strangely enough the most neutral one, saying it is disordered. A word which I think has been invented in the church a little bit to illustrate what it means. You know, sort of, it's a trendy word, but a pastoral approach. Could you please explain a little bit about what it is and what are the presuppositions on which this therapy or whatever it is based, and if actually people do go through this path?
Well, this therapy, it's a broad field, and many different therapists are working in this field, and for different reasons, and so I can't speak for all of them. I think that for most of them, it's simply a fact that these therapists encounter clients who are uncomfortable with, for example, their same-sex attractions. So these people are adults often. They come to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist and they say, I have unwanted same-sex attractions. I am attracted to men. If it's a man, he'll come in and say, I am attracted to men and I don't want to. These are unwanted attractions and I want to see if you can help me get rid of these attractions so that I become attracted to women as I think I should be as a man. Now, so it's a subjective appraisal of that person's own life, and they sense that their deep identity is as a man, if they're men. And so they say, well, since I'm a man, I should be attracted to women. And therefore, I want to see if I can get the same-sex attraction that I have diminished and the attraction to women increased so that I may live according to what I consider to be a normal and real, authentic human life. And so these therapies have been devised for a long time. The literature goes back a century. So, and in the last, I would say 30 years, the therapies have grown in sophistication and success rates of close to 30% have been found for the documented and scientifically reviewed types of therapy. Now, a lot of misinformation is floating about on these things. Some people think that gays are being electroshocked against their will. People are being forced to convert to another orientation against their will. No, this is not what is happening. It's already illegal in all Western countries to coerce or torture or force anyone to do something they don't want to do. What is happening is that a lot of people, I would say mostly because of a subjective feeling that they do not want to be attracted to the same sex, and this may be because of their faith, and maybe because just of their anthropology, they approach these therapists. These therapists professionally discuss with them on the origins of this attraction. They could have been, it could be genetic in some cases. Other cases, it could be a trauma in childhood, over-attachment with the mother, distance of the father, these kinds of things. And they talk it through, they become acquainted with the trauma, they overcome the trauma. There are other ways of dealing with this issue, but it's seen indeed from the therapeutic point of view as a psychological disorder that could be overcome through therapy. And it has been successful for many people. 30% of the clients in some studies have signaled that they have diminished same-sex attraction and increased opposite-sex attraction, and that this is of a long duration. But the propaganda being pumped out by the mainstream media in Canada is that these therapies harm homosexuals, that they cause homosexuals to commit suicide, and that therefore these therapies ought to be banned. And they have, in effect, been, I would say, de facto banned in Canada. Recently, there is legislation called C4. The name has changed from C6 to C4. In any case, this law has been passed in Canada in December of last year, and therapists are no longer allowed to advertise reparative therapy or conversion therapy. They're no longer allowed to make money through this therapy. And for minors, they face jail times of up to 5 years if they give this therapy to a minor. So this actually is a big problem not only for therapists, but for parents and for clergy who may want to discuss with children or adolescents, young adults like 16, 17, about these things, and who may want to help an adolescent regain integrity. That is no longer legal in Canada, and people who do so are threatened with jail time of up to 5 years, which is ridiculous. But that's...
You talked about minors. The other way around. Does it happen very often that somebody who's a minor says, I want to change my biological structure in order to become what I imagine I have to be? Do you mean to a transsexual operation,
Right.
or medication? Does it happen often? Does it happen often?
I think that this is happening a lot more recently, especially with the transgender propaganda, once again, being pumped out of the mainstream media. Children are starting to question whether they're male or female, regardless of their biological sex, and are pursuing sex change operations, which are often permanent because involving hormones that reverse, that completely sterilize the person for life. There was a recent case of a father who wanted to prevent his daughter from doing this, and he was finally rendered unable to even talk about this subject under threat of being jailed for it, because he was trying to get somebody to understand that he didn't want his underage daughter to ruin her life because she had believed in the propaganda she had been told by her school and by the general culture. And so this bill, what I just mentioned, the conversion therapy ban in Canada, makes it illegal for somebody, a father or even a counselor or a priest, to talk to this woman, this young woman, and to tell her, well, perhaps you should wait, 3-4 years until you're certain that you want to reverse your sex or change your sex, because if you do this now, you may regret it later. Well, that is considered a breach. That is considered illegal in Canada. The only conversation which is allowed in Canada now pertaining to these topics is either a conversation affirming the choice of that young lady to change her sex, that is allowed, or else a conversation freely exploring sex and gender, but without any a priorize, without any notion that one decision is normal and the other is abnormal. So in other words, they enforce, I would say, insanity, as if my biological self had nothing to do with what I should be, or what I am called to be. And I just want to read quickly the preamble to this legislation, which made conversion therapy illegal. So this legislation has a preamble, and it explains the spirit in which this legislation was done. So it says, whereas conversion therapy causes harm to society because, among other things, it is based on and propagates myths and stereotypes about sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression, including the myth that a person's sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression ought not to be changed. And whereas in light of those harms, it is important to discourage and denounce the provision of conversion therapy. So what they're saying is that it is a myth to say that a man and a woman, as Genesis indicates, have a vocation to marry, have a complementarity, and that their union creates life, and that therefore a man who decides to become a homosexual and have relations with another man is not following the natural or the revealed law, that is a myth according to the framers of this legislation, and that has to be attacked. And so what we have here is an attack against Christian anthropology and the Christian worldview on a fundamental point, which is male, female, and marriage.
No, it's the origin of life that's being touched. Could you, what does such a conversion therapy consist of? Do you speak to the psychiatrist? Do you look for causes, you know? I mean, the image we have of Freud is that you lie on a couch and you tell all the things you feel and have felt. And then Freud resolves your problems, you know. It's sort of it's a caricature. But how does this conversion therapy work?
Again, there are many types of conversion therapy, or reparative therapy, as it is also called. It's mostly talking to a therapist. So the kinds that I have been acquainted with do not involve drugs of any kind. There may be some that involve some kind of drugs to help along the way. I do not know about all the types of therapy available, but the ones that I know of are speech therapy, and the key element in this therapy is to discover the trauma that may be at the root of your same-sex attraction, which in the mind of the therapist, of the most therapists, is not normal, is not something that should be there. It is there because of an accident of life, a trauma, or some other thing. But this same-sex attraction in the therapist's mind is the symptom of a kind of trauma or an abnormal occurrence in the life of that person, and that trauma has to be dissolved in that person's life so that person could be freed of these attractions. The underlying problem, therefore, has to be identified through speech. And as I kind of alluded to, oftentimes for men, there's a relationship with the mother that is problematic, perhaps a closeness that's unhealthy, and paired with a distance from the father. So this type of dynamic has to be understood and overcome through understanding of this situation. There's also self-esteem issues, wanting to be with others very badly, identifying with others, with men, having trouble identifying with men, awkwardness in one's developmental life, in one's teens, all these issues. And so this is the type of thing that is analyzed with the goal of uncovering the underlying cause of the same-sex attraction and then working through it and coming to overcome it through understanding. So this is the type of therapy involved. It's a far cry from the caricature that some draw of shock therapy. That basically these homosexual men are strapped down to beds and electrocuted repeatedly through aversion therapy, what's called aversion therapy, which is not what is used today. That type of therapy was in use at a certain time in psychology, and it was widely used for different things, eating disorders and other things of that nature. And it was a fad, but hasn't really been practiced in any field of psychology and any branch of psychology for the last 5 decades. So it's a kind of a fake pretext for what I would consider the essence of this law is an attack against Christian anthropology.
Just a question about the result. If you say 30%, the therapy is successful, how many of those people actually do have a married life after that, or the other possibility, to settle down for a celibate life?
I don't have any hard data on the results. What I do have, there's a documentary that we helped produce in 2020. It was published, and one of the two speakers in that documentary was an ex-gay man. So he was a man who had same-sex attractions and could not get rid of them. And after having undergone this therapy, he went on to marriage. So that's a case in point of a man who has so successfully gotten rid of his same-sex attraction that he succeeded, in fact, in marriage and has been married ever since. So that's one case that I know of concretely of a man who, with same-sex attraction, has overcome them through therapy and has succeeded in getting married and living a quote-unquote normal life with his wife.
I just have a question which, for me, comes up a lot in the discussions, and I'm just trying to find out if it's true. I wonder that the, let's say, the crisis in sexual identity which we see in our times, doesn't it have to do with the sort of anthropology of commercial advertising? Because in commercial advertising we actually see an image of what it is a man and to be a woman, which is actually quite a caricature. It's exaggerated, it's idealistic, it doesn't make much sense, and fertility, having kids, seem to be completely evacuated out of it, out of commercial advertising, except maybe for some things like washing powder and. But what would you make of that? Because, you know, if what you call Catholic anthropology is replaced, it's fading away, then it must have been replaced by something else. And I think, what do you think about this whole language, this gospel of commercial advertising?
Well, I think that advertising is a part of it, and it's a part of the problem. But I would say that since roughly the Protestant Revolution, we've been on a trend of subjectivism. So of I decide about reality. There's a quote about Casey versus Planned Parenthood, a Supreme Court decision in the United States that guarantees contraception. And part of the ruling states that, you know, the essence of freedom is to determine the meaning of life and existence. Each person ought to have the freedom of determining what is existence and what is life. Well, that means they should also be free to determine their sex, what marriage means, and everything else. And so the society is subjectivistic. I alone, I don't need an authority, I don't need anything. I alone decide what's right for me, who I am, and not even my biology can tell me what I am or who I am to be. Certainly not the church, certainly not the government. I am the one. And so if I elect somebody, I elect that person to enable me to choose anything, including the meaning of life and what is life. So if I say that the child in my womb is not a life, that means it's not a life, and I can kill that entity. I can get rid of it. If I say that, you know, even though I have the appearances of a man, if I say that I am a woman, that's my choice, and that's my right. That's what freedom is about, and that's what we're going to get. And so the anthropology is no longer Christian. It's no longer anything. It's subjectivist. And yes, advertising and commercialism, I think, fuels that, because these companies, these predatory companies, don't care about anything except money. So if they can just create a desire or if a desire happens to be there, they will feed it and fan it if that can make them more money. And so let's say, well, we know that everyone has original sin. Everyone wants to rebel against the plan of God. Well, they blow on the embers of original sin. And if somebody has a disordered desire, whether it's the desire to steal, or the desire to have like enormous wealth or whatever, or the desire to kill or whatever, if they can make money on that, they don't care whether it contradicts God's law or if there's a peril for society, as long as they can maintain their position. And maybe they don't even care about the long or medium term of their own corporation. They just want to make a lot of money now. And so that's where I would see the economics or the advertising coming, is that if fanning the flames of subjectivism, if flattering the person will get them money, they will do so, and that only further exacerbates this trend of subjectivism in our society, of individualism to the extreme, of radical individualism. That's the problem. We no longer even accept an anthropology or any metaphysics, any reality that would go beyond our own desires and will, because we've been told that we are free and we can choose whatever we want. And so that, I think, is the ideology at the root of our modernity, of our problems in our culture, and the reasons, and that's the challenge for the church today, and that's what Benedict XVI called the dictatorship of relativism, meaning we are in a liberal dictatorship. We are imposed this worldview that everyone has a right to their own point of view. And if you say, no, that person is wrong because they contradict reason and they contradict, God, well, then you're the evil one for having said that. Because we're in a dictatorship of relativism. Everyone should have their own beliefs. And if you challenge that right of each person to have their own beliefs, you are excommunicated from society. You are the evil one. As long as you agree that everyone can have their own choice of anything, including reality itself and male and female and all that, well, then you're all right. So that's what we're fighting here in Quebec, and that's what all the pro-lifers around the world are fighting, is this radical individualism or subjectivism.
Vanity, vanity, all is vanity. Huh?
Yes, yes.
Mr. Buscemi, thank you very much for this interview. I know it's not going to be the last time. There's lots of things to discuss, but thank you for this time, your contribution to giving more insight and giving more information about the importance of life that is a gift. Thank you very much.
Father. Have a great day. God bless.